out in the field. The only different thing about this method is that for some reason I can't explain, I've been able to have the ability to see these things and use them in a different way, and the result is an incredible different method. Now let's step over here and look at our first example. This is a common plant in tropical areas. It's known as a sea grape. It's in the Coccoluba family, and this tree is the very first tropical bonsai that I created. As a matter of fact, bonsai often commemorate an important event, whether it's a wedding or the birth of a child, a new arrival. So what I did was, the very first minute I landed in Florida, I grabbed a sea grape seed and I planted it. And that's where this sea grape came from. Now ordinarily, sea grapes have rather large leaves. The size of an adult sea grape leaf would be about the parameter of where my hands are. And as you can see, this is extremely reduced. You can see that it has many small leaves. It has a very interesting twisty trunk, which is in a horizontal style. It has many exposed roots, and you can also see how the medium is mounded above the pot. Now I'm going to show you something very interesting pertaining to this new method. I'm going to pick this up and turn it out of the pot. I'm going to hold the plant with my fingers, which is the method we use for getting them out of the pot. I'm going to turn it upside down, and you can see that the plant lifts cleanly right out of the pot. It stays together. It will not fall apart. And this is the result of the fact that we use coarse unmilled sphagnum moss for our medium. We never use soil. Now, in the traditional method, they employ various sizes of graded soils. They sift the soils through screens. They use gravel in the bottom. It's a marvelous, marvelous method. The traditional method is a testament to the ingenuity and the serene understanding of the Orient, of the horticulture, of art, and of the indomitable will of man to succeed. I never ever mean to imply that there's anything wrong with the traditional method. And I did the traditional method for many, many years. But when I moved to Florida in 1979, my bonsai did not do so well. And in trying to find out how I could make them be healthier, how I could succeed where I was failing, I stumbled upon a different method. Now, the sphagnum moss is the first change. Let me show you something pertaining to reduction. One of the key factors with any bonsai is the reduction. And by reduction, I mean the fact that the plant parts are smaller than normal. The leaves are smaller than the leaves would normally be. The habit, which means the way the plant is growing, is ordinarily smaller and tighter. The limbs tend to be fatter, and the root mass tends to be smaller. Now, all of us have seen bonsai in various places for sale, and I would like to point out to you that if you do not see a small root mass for the size of the foliage, which should be at least the same size of the root mass or bigger, you're not looking at a true bonsai. Bonsai need their roots contained. You should see leaves that are smaller. I'm going to show you a cutting. This is an Aurelia cutting. You can see how large the leaves are. I'm going to take one off, and I'm going to hold it next to this little tree, because this plant in this pot that made this leaf was a cutting from this little tree. And you can see how tiny the leaves have become. Now I'm going to break one of these off and hold it up for comparison. You can see how very small the leaves have become, but the leaves are perfectly formed. That's very important. Sometimes we trim the actual leaves and needles, but the leaves should be perfectly formed. Now I'll turn this around so that you can see it from all angles. And that leads us to another very important difference in my method. The new method prefers trees that are well-shaped on all sides. The traditional people like to think of bonsai as sculpture, and we do too, except that traditionally the trees are set up so that there is one particular viewing angle, one particular point where the trees are seen to perfection. And if you look from the back, they may not look nearly as good as from the front. but we prefer trees that are developed on all sides as though they were specimens in an arboretum or out in a field growing unrestrained. Now let's look at some other specimens. Now this is a large one. Move this to the side. Here we have a very common indoor plant, the Ficus benjamina, known as the weeping fig. These are very, very popular for a number of reasons. They have beautiful glossy green foliage. They generally make large trees that many people ordinarily wouldn't be able to have in the house, but because they're tropical, they tend to grow beautifully. You can see here the number of roots that are climbing all around, and again you see the medium mounded up. It's beautifully greened and mossed over. I'm going to turn this so that you can see the aerial roots that have sprung out everywhere. And if you look up into this foliage, I'm going to lift this up, you'll see that the branches have become beautifully knotted together on their own, and that they're beginning to grow together. This growing together is a completely normal, natural plant response that we use for a method I call aggregate grafting, which is nothing more than growing two small seedlings or cuttings side by side and allowing them to grow together to make a single plant. That's how this tree was created. This tree was actually an air layer that had other rooted cuttings planted alongside so that they all rooted together. And as you can see, it's quite large. That brings us to another interesting point about bonsai. Many people think that all bonsai are very, very small trees, and this isn't true. Some bonsai can be extremely tiny, and some may be 5 or 6 feet tall. The important thing is that the foliage be reduced and that the habit be a miniature representation of the adult form. Now I'll set this aside so we can get our next example. Our next tree is a Florida slash pine. This is a species that grows wild all through the South and down in California. Normally this tree has needles that are over 1 foot long, and when the new growths come out, they're frequently a yard and a half long. As you can see, this little tree is tiny, and I'm going to hold my thumb right here so that you can have a source of reference. You can see how densely packed all the little heads of foliage are, and how it's begun to form little horizontal branches all through here. The way we shape these trees is never ever with wire. Personally, I have a real thing about seeing trees wrapped with wire and the branches bent in various right angles. I've always been a little amused and somewhat perturbed by the bonsai people that insist on orientalizing all of the trees they deal with. The number one point with bonsai, if it's to be an art form, is that the tree represent the natural habit of that species in miniature. So for someone in New Jersey or California or Florida or Oregon to take a Native American species, wrap wire all around it, bend it in relentless right angles until it's completely orientalized, until it looks like something from China or Japan, is the antithesis of what bonsai is about. Unless, of course, you're making something with a Chinese accent. If you want to imitate the Chinese and Japanese, that's great, so long as it's a decision. But bonsai do not have to look oriental. And as a matter of fact, the styles I prefer are all native Southern American styles. I study the trees, I draw little diagrams, and I try to imitate the native habits that I see. Now let's look at another good representative. Now this tree is a Syrinum cherry. Syrinum cherry is a very, very popular tropical for hedges as well as for nurseries and greenhouses all across the country. It not only has a beautiful peely bark, which you can see through all of these numerous branches, but it also has gorgeous little tiny star-shaped flowers with fluffy centers, beautifully scented, and this particular tree makes hundreds of cherries at a time. Now, as I turn this, I hope you can see the roots along the top of the planting, and again you'll notice the planting is mounded with many areas of interest so that it isn't just flat. And I want you to notice the way the canopies of foliage are shaped so that there are open areas. These open areas are critical because you must be able to see the branches underneath. Now we prune these so that the branches have this particular configuration so that the branches come around and they curve up to lift the foliage above the branches so you can see them. This is a particularly good representative of the slanted style. Now don't be worried about styles and whether you're familiar with them or not. This is an ongoing learning process. And while it's wonderful to create miniature trees, the most important thing is that you begin to see the trees around you for the beautiful things they are. Hopefully you'll learn to take a few minutes and enjoy the areas that are around you. That is the number one point. Now let's set this aside. And look at our next one. This is a very, very common indoor plant. This is called a croton. Crotons are very common all through South Florida. They're plants that are used as hedges and ornamentals, and this yellow spotting is the particular attraction of this particular croton. They come a variety, a wild array of colors, reds and greens and golds, every conceivable combination of those. The leaves come various shapes, various sizes, and again with these leaves we have a tremendous reduction, not only in the size of the leaves, but in the overall habit of the plant, because the plant naturally grows very rangy, long areas of wild, twisted foliage. And what I've done is to prune this down. As a matter of fact, this particular specimen came from someone's yard. They had complained to me they were going to get rid of it. They were sick of it. It was a wild, rangy, ugly-looking thing. And I said, "Can I have it?" And they said, "Sure, it's worthless." Here it is now, 5 years later, after having had the major cuts, and with a little bit of pruning, and now you can see it's quite a handsome little tree. Again, we have beautiful emerald green moss all around the top. We have these very interesting surface roots. We have thick, heavy trunk development, good horizontal branch development, and a good overall reduction. And of course, they come right out of the pot, which makes it very easy to visually check whether or not we need to do any repotting. And we're going to be discussing that throughout the series. Again, I want to urge you to try these things because these are within the scope of anyone that wants to be a little careful and do their best. I've taught hundreds of people to have success with these trees. Now the next tree is a firethorn. Firethorn is a very, very interesting species. They have flowers and beautiful, beautiful coral red fruit. This one has an interesting shape. It has this odd little three system of thick roots down here and these nice little horizontal canopies. And you can see that the foliage is extremely reduced. An interesting little tree. Now this one, this is a wild Florida grape. One of the things I like to point out to people is that bonsai do not have to be junipers, 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 a pine, and a maple. Everywhere I go and I look at bonsai collections, I see junipers to the nth power, a few pines, and a maple. Bonsai can be anything woody, anything with permanent woody growth. Now this happens to be a wild grape, but if a person was a wine connoisseur, they could grow concords or whatever they wanted. You can use anything at all. If you have an interest in roses, roses make beautiful bonsai, gorgeous bonsai. All you need to do is work with the foliage, prune it back the way you would ordinarily do to a rose, but have a more artistic point in mind so that you shape the tree. Now, this is another good example of the artistic possibilities with this medium. You can see this tree has no pot. This tree says no to a pot. You can see that the roots are popping right out of the moss so that we're able to see that development. If I wanted to increase the size of the root mass so that the overall size of the tree would increase, I could just pack a little more sphagnum around this. We're going to be discussing this in depth later in the series. Now let's look at this one. This is a very popular subject. This is bamboo. And this isn't just any bamboo. This is black bamboo. Black bamboo normally has canes that are as big around as a person's waist, maybe Oprah Winfrey's new waist. And this is a gorgeous little specimen. The foliage is very, very reduced. It's a beautiful little thing. You can see in here that it's like a little forest, and as a matter of fact, here is a good comparison. Right in the center, I believe you'll be able to see there is a rhizome right here. This was the original piece of plant that I started with. That was 2 years ago. And now you can see from this original piece, and you can see how big it is, all of these others have come and they've grown out, and look at how much smaller they are. That's what I mean when I say reduction. The entire size should get smaller. Now let's take a look at something a little different. This is a very interesting plant. It has an almost unique shape. You can see that the foliage is nice and waxy green. This is a very, very tough little plant. These succeed beautifully in the house. When I think about my years in New York City, where I was so happy to have anything green, where lettuce is a houseplant because it's so dark and dismal in those little apartments, something like this is a godsend. If you have a hot southern window, I'm going to show you how to grow bougainvilleas. If you have a cool northern window, I'm going to show you how to grow asparagus ferns as bonsai. Now this is called a coontie, which is in the Zamia family, which is very related to cycads. We call the cycads living fossils, which is a semi-contradictory term, meaning that they were around in the great age of coal. And it's because of, in part, these trees that we have the coal and the oil that we have today. And here's a beautiful little site. Right in the center, we can see the brand new little fronds unfurling, coming out all fuzzy and tan with their new little leaves ready to unfurl. Bonsai not only give you themselves as beautiful little things to treasure. It's something that can be taken as a hobby. It's something that can be taken nearly to religious heights. You can be with these trees and feel a very real sense of energy that they are giving you. The more you give to them, the more they respond to you. Now, as I get my next tree, one of the things I'd like to address is whether or not bonsai is cruel. I'm sometimes asked by normally sensible people whether bonsai is cruel. And I'd like to ask you, how do you feel when you mow your lawn? How do you feel when you trim your hedge? How do you feel as you eat that salad? It's not cruel to work with bonsai. We do not torture the trees into these shapes. This is not a horticultural auto-da-fe. This is a way of taking ordinary trees that may have to fight for their very lives out in the wild, or sit as a part of a nondescript hedge and offer them a little piece of serene contentment. It's a way of taking the tree and pampering it. We feed them, we care for them, we protect them, we prize them. And as a result, when you spend time in a bonsai garden, you're going to discover a unique feeling. It's inexplicable. I'm not going to dwell on it. You'll think I'm crazy. But when people come over to my house and they sit for cool drinks in the bonsai garden, on the way out they always say, you know, I feel like I took a nap. I feel good. And you know, I think that something like this, something that's practical, something that's relatively easy for everyone, something that's artistic within everyone's reach, is perhaps one of the answers people need to look for. I would much rather create a bonsai than get into something dangerous. This is a beautiful thing. This is a little Australian pine. This tree is considered a pest in the southern states because it reproduces so rapidly. It has a remarkable ability to take pruning, so it's a natural for bonsai. You can see the gorgeous growth of moss here. You can also see these little strings that I tied the planting together with, because being on a rock, of course, it would have flipped off until the tree was rooted. You can see these open little stretches and the way I've trained the tree into this beautiful spreading horizontal habit, as though the wind were blowing it repeatedly. These grow on the ocean quite often. Now let's take a look at the next one. This is a ficus. The ficus family is very, very popular for houseplants. This is Ficus nerifolia, which is famous for its little tiny leaves. And this is still a very young bonsai, but I want to point out an interesting fact. This has a variety of sizes of leaves. Because the tree has not yet decided, now where's a nice big one? It's harder to find the big ones than it is to find the little ones. Here we go. I'm going to do my best to hold these up. I'll hold them against my shirt so that you have something to see them against. And you can see the discrepancy in the sizes. They're both small, but one is much smaller. This tree is beginning to reduce, and you can see that the branches are beginning to be horizontal. I never wire. What I do is I just take a moment to bend the branches down. Just bend the branches down lightly, no big deal. And they stay down after a few weeks. This even has some little mushrooms coming out. Now that's the Ficus nerifolia. Now if you like flowers, and many people are growing hibiscus in the house, here's a beauty. This is the little hibiscus known as snow queen because of the variegated foliage. This little tree blooms. It makes beautiful red flowers, and I'm going to show you how to create one from a nursery tree later in the series. This is a nice one. I'm going to speed this up a little to show you more of the trees, because I think that's really why we're all here. We're here to look at the bonsai, because the proof of the new method is these trees. These are southern slash pines set up in a group. We're going to be discussing groups, and I'm going to show you how to make one. This group, of course, lives on this little rock. And they're beginning to get these interesting windswept patterns. You can see how small the needles are. Yes, I trim the needles. Do you have a problem with that? The reason I trim the needles is that every time they grow out smaller. And every time they grow out smaller, I have to trim them less. And if I had the time, if I only had 12 trees instead of 137, I would be able to trim all of these so they were very, very tiny. A person that just had this group could have these needles so small they had to get in there with eyebrow scissors. Now here's an interesting thing. If you're like me, when someone tells you you can't do something, you go right out and you try to do it. My yard is full of things that people told me, that doesn't grow here, that won't root, that doesn't sprout, those seeds are no good, that won't work. I've heard for years you cannot reduce palms. The reason for this is that the palm only has one eye of growth, which generally sprouts right out of the nut and comes up. And if you were to cut this right there, the entire thing would die. I think that by restraining the roots and compensating by feeding, I'm going to produce some dwarf coconut trees. We'll wait and see. Now here's a beauty. I'm going to be leaving you with this Ficus benjamina. take a look at this. If you've got one in your office, take a look at that one. By these simple horticultural methods, you'll be able to grow these bonsai yourself. Please join us for the shows. I'm Brian Bachelder. This will be a new horizon in bonsai. Hi, I'm Brian Bachelder, and this is New Horizons in Bonsai, the show that teaches you a new method to create your own bonsai so that you can enjoy success with these fantastic dwarf trees. Now remember, this is a different method from the traditional method. Do not mix the methods. Just do as I show you, and you should have good success. Now, this week, we're going to look at a traditional subject that is grown with this new untraditional method. The subject is a juniper. Most bonsai collections have many junipers. They lend themselves very well. They have small, needle-like foliage. They take pruning very well. They're very bushy, so you have a variety of attitudes you can prune your plants into. They look old before they really are old. Let's step over and take a look at it. Now here it is. Here's the little bonsai which we brought in. This is in the windswept style, and we call it that because it tends to lean to one side, and the way this is created is through pruning. Now I want you to notice something. When you take any close look at any of my trees, please notice there is never any wire. Never any wire. I just don't like wire on the trees. I consider it dangerous. I consider it overdone when I see a tree mummified with wire and all the branches bent at right angles. I feel personally that there's no need for that, especially with the new method. This is a temperate tree. In other words, it's a tree from an area of the country that gets cold in the winter. A lot of my trees are tropicals. Whether they're tropicals or they're temperate trees, the new method encourages such fast growth that you have a variety of angles to choose from when you prune. For instance, I'll turn this a little, and you can see along the back here that I've eliminated all of the foliage along this side. This is to help give it the windswept look so that all the foliage is going in one direction. And simply by repeating these cuts, you can make your branches change angles. Right here, there was a cut which made it go down here. Then there was a cut which made it turn around this way. You can create all of these effects simply by pruning. And personally, I think that's a lot better than having wire wrapped all over the place, no matter how cleanly it's done. I don't like to see the trees looking uncomfortable. Now I'm going to turn this slowly so that you can see it from a variety of sides. And another thing you're going to notice is that the tree is not one-sided. There's an asymmetrical balance, but it is balanced on all sides. And this is another point of departure from the traditional method. The traditional method treats bonsai, as I do, as sculpture, but they feel generally, and I say generally with notable exceptions, that the tree should have one angle for viewing, and all the foliage is set up so that it is to be viewed from this one angle, which means that if you turn the tree around or you look from another angle, the illusion somewhat falls apart. Personally, I like all my trees to be, if asymmetrical, at least balanced, so that they can be viewed from any angle, like a specimen would be in a park or a tree that has enough room to grow. Bonsai are living sculpture. I want to say one important point about this method versus the traditional method, perhaps versus is exactly the word I want to avoid. I do not want to imply anything negative about the traditional method. It is absolutely perfect. It's a testimonial to the genius, the horticultural genius of the Orient, that they were able to first visit these trees in their natural surroundings, then take these trees and learn how to cultivate them so they would live in captivity, and then ultimately to propagate and artificially create bonsai under captive conditions in cultivation. So when I say this is a new method and it works more easily and perhaps better for some things, I'd like to think of it as simply adding another chapter to bonsai, not replacing tradition, but adding another chapter. Now what I'd like to do is put this aside, and let's take a brief look at our diagram. And here is this juniper drawn as a diagram. Perhaps I'll bring this back so that you can see it in about the same place as the diagram, so that you can see that we have the horizontal angle of the pot played off against this crook in the trunk, set off by these horizontals in the foliage. It's a pretty simple design. It helps to diagram your tree so you have a firm idea in your head of what you'd like before you go in with your shears. Because once you cut something off, you've got to wait a little while before it grows back and you have that decision again. Now I've got a nursery juniper, and we're going to take it out of the pot and we're going to pot this up according to our new method. I'll set this aside. Here's our nursery juniper right here. This is a very handsomely grown plant. It's a real typical Juniper procumbens, which simply means that it creeps along the ground. It has a hugging attitude along the ground. And I think there's going to be some good shapes under here to work with. So we'll take this out of the soil and get ready to do our bonsai. Here's our soil catcher. Let's put this up here. When you take a plant out of the soil, in the south you will want to check to make sure that there are no biting inhabitants in there. Slip your hand around the trunk of the tree and catch it as it comes out of the pot. This shouldn't be too hard. There we go. Take this out. Work to free the roots, which are coming right out. This is a real easy one. And here we have our roots all spread out. It's very important, critical, to get all the soil out. Do not be nervous about removing the soil. Take your time, do a thorough job. If you need to, step over to your hose or whatever you're using and rinse those roots off. Do not do this at home. In other words, do not put this in the kitchen sink and rinse this off at home. An easier place to do this would be relative's house or a friend's house if they're not at home. That's especially good. Okay, now we're all set. We've got our roots all nice and clean. This plant's been plenty washed. And now we're all set to select a pot. Now let's set this guy down. Now here's a nice little traditional bonsai pot. And since this is a traditional subject, that would look nice. You can see that it has excellent drainage, 2 large holes on the bottom, as well as these little feet around the edge that lift the pot up just enough so that cohesive tension doesn't keep a body of water underneath. Good drainage is essential no matter what method you use. But the nice thing about the sphagnum is it has a remarkable ability to hold enough water but to let the water drip out if there's too much. Now there are other kinds of pots. For instance, these are also traditional pots. We have this little one here with this little decoration around the rim, a little square one, and again it's got good drainage. We have a rectangular one which is unglazed. These are all very nice, but I think you'll agree that if I hold this over this, the size of the plant is just a little large for that pot. We could trim it to fit. Now I'm thinking about it, we really could do that, and that might be rather nice, you know it? Let's go for that. Let's put this plant in this small pot. I like that better than this. I was going to do this, but I'm the star. I can change my mind. So we're going to use this smaller pot. I mean, what good is being the star if you can't change your mind? So we have our little, excellent. Our little taboulet right there, and we'll put the pot right on there. Now before we get started, let's just trim a little bit of these roots. Now we've spread these out. These are nice and clean. I think that we can just trim these right off like this. The important thing about root trimming is that when you reduce the roots, you also reduce the plant's ability to suck up water. And that's important because if it if it can't continue to convey the water to the top begins to die back. So what we want to do now is to sensibly make a corresponding reduction in the foliage on the top of the tree. So let's get out our pruners and study the shape of this. Now immediately we can eliminate this little bit of dead wood right there. Any dead wood, unless it's got some kind of intrinsic artistic value, should be eliminated. So we'll take that out. Now here's something. We have a choice here. I'll hold this so that you can see it. I'll try to separate these. There is a branch that curves this way, and under it a branch that continues straight across. So we almost never want to have branches crisscrossing one another. So now we need to decide which of these is the more interesting branch, and to work with that. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to eliminate this top branch that curves across the other. Just take a look under there. All right. Let's get the pruners in there, and there it goes. And that's not bad. You can hardly make out the pruning cut. And now suddenly, with the elimination of this branch, these pleasant little tufts of foliage are beginning to stand up so that we can see them. That's nice. So let's continue our pruning. As I prune something like this, I try to find an upright growth to continue the line of the bough so that when it's cut, it's not quite so painfully obvious. So we'll trim this up. There we go. And shorten these on the sides. Now we've got that shortened. And I think it's pretty reasonable to think we can shorten this one. There we go. And perhaps just a little right there. That's looking good. Let's trim these other areas. We don't want them to stick out too far since we're using such a small pot. We want to maintain a certain relationship of the pot to the plant. I think that that's starting to get there. Now with a low creeping juniper like this, I'm going to turn this over, and I hope you can see underneath that it's flat and it's open. But we want to see in there, we want to see all those nice little branches, so I'm going to clear away all of the stuff that is not particularly adding anything to the shape of the tree. We'll just clear those out so that the structure of the tree is more apparent. Do not be frightened of pruning. As a matter of fact, pruning is a natural process that plants count on. They really need to be pruned. They expect either harsh weather, insects, or roaming herbivores to feed on them. And just as the purpose of fruit is to be attractive so creatures eat it and disperse the seed, the purpose of the foliage is to make food for the plant and to be able to grow back in case anything should happen to it. Now here's what we'll do. We'll eliminate that a little bit. This is going very nicely. Just eliminate that. We'll open that shape up. Now I have a lot more experience than you do. Please do not be dismayed. Please don't sit there and say, oh, I could never do that fast. All you have to do is try. Consider your first bonsai no more than perhaps vegetables, carrots or cabbage. Go out and get a couple inexpensive junipers and experiment till you begin to get a feel for it. Nobody bounces right into something immediately. Just take your time, give it your best shot, and if you just try, I'm certain you're going to have good luck. Now we're just about finished with that. We can always do a little more pruning later if we need to. I'm using my fingers to just get in there and open a little more of that up. That looks fine. So now we have the tree. partially pruned, partially to scale with the size of the pot. There. So now what we're going to do, we're going to put that aside. We're going to clear the decks here. I'm big on clearing the decks. In the Navy. Okay, now here's our sphagnum. This, as a friend of mine likes to say, this is key. Here is our pot, what we call the pot-o-muck, and actually this is sphagnum moss which has been soaking in water. And there's no mystery to this. You take the dry sphagnum moss, which I have here in A, and you put the sphagnum moss from A into B, and you simply add that, and then you get in there and you mix this into the water. Mix it into the water, work with your hands to wet it up. You can do this ahead of time if you like. It gets smelling just a trifle swampy, like some of my favorite parts of New Jersey, but just work with it and it soaks right up. Now I'm going to show you something. Sphagnum is a series of dry, empty cells, and when you put it in the water, it begins to soak up water. So I'm going to squeeze this out. Now watch what happens when I let it go back in the water. See how it's expanding? It's plumping up, it's soaking up water, it's growing before your eyes. Whoa! Now just squeeze this up. This is good stuff. And we're going to make our bonsai out of this. This is the potting medium. Don't add anything to it, don't meddle with it, just use it the way it is. You can buy it in a hobby bag, you can buy it in a bale. Bales are a lot less expensive. And they're great conversation starters. So we'll just put that down here and bring up some of the sphagnum into the world's luckiest kitchen sink. And we'll put our pot down. Now the way we start this is you just take a little of the soaked sphagnum and you make a little pad in the bottom of the pot. Don't worry about how to do it, just put it in there. It's just sitting in there. It's no big deal. I haven't done anything. Just put it in the pot. Next you take your tree, and you'll notice that there's, as you separate the roots, there's a certain order to it. And what you want to do is try to be able to introduce small amounts of the sphagnum in between these roots so that the majority of them are not touching one another. Again, don't worry. It's not a critical thing exactly how you do it. The only critical thing is that you do it at all, which is once what Maria Callas said about singing. So, put this in here. As a matter of fact, Callas is the source of many wonderful anecdotes as well as valuable lessons to any person in the arts. And she once said, "It amuses me to overcome a difficulty." So you can keep your MTV. I would rather make bonsai. Now just, you saw what I did? We padded the roots all around so that they weren't touching one another. No big deal, nothing neat. Just carry that over, place it in the bonsai pot, and now begin to work with your fingers. Just push your fingers. Do not worry about the roots. It is more important, dare I say critical, that the roots be tight. They've got to be tight. They want to be tight in there. Just tighten them up. Work with your fingers. If you need to use a tool, if you're out of shape, use a stick. Go ahead. I lift weights. I use my fingers. So just push those in there. Make it nice and tight. If the tree wiggles, all will be undone. But if it's nice and tight, you're home free. Even while we're talking, the roots are healing. They're in this pleasant acid medium. They're swimming around, they're deciding it's not so bad. They're saying, oh, this is delicious. Could I have a little more of this? So just put that in there. And we're just about ready to start with the surface moss. As you poke your fingers through there, if you come across a sudden gap, if you're suddenly able to push your finger, and you see how my finger's in there, there's a little air spot in there, an empty spot. So we just reach for another little bit of sphagnum, stuff that in there, work with your fingers, hold the tree with the other pot so that it stays in the same position. And as you work, keep looking at your tree. Give it a little spin so you can see it as you're working. And we're just about ready for the decorative moss. The moss that makes them look a jillion years old. Take your little pieces of decorative moss. You find it in any shady, moist place. Place it on the surface and squeeze it into the sphagnum. Can you see the water coming out of here? Sure you can. It's oozing out. Look at that. That means the water is circulating from the sphagnum through the moss. That's tremendously important. Don't think that's not important. That is tremendously important. Because again, all will be for naught if you do not make good contact with the moss. But if you do, you'll be rewarded by lots and lots of rich, green, healthy moss. And nothing makes them look older than moss. Now, it's a good idea to try to get large sheets of it, but occasionally you'll get unlucky and you'll have little bits to choose from like I'm doing now. It doesn't matter. Moss can also be stored. You can take your moss and dry it out and pulverize it and put it in a little Ziploc baggie. Then when you need it, you can sprinkle it onto the surface and press it into the moist sphagnum. Give it a little spritz of water with your sprayer, and in a few weeks it turns green. But if you're like me, you want it now, so I don't want to wait. I use the moss, just put it on the surface, and it looks great right away. Now we're just about ready to start the squeezing. Now at this point, we not only want to make good contact for the moss on the surface, you want to create something a little more interesting than just this lump in this pot. So I use my fingers and I just push my fingers into the planting to create topographical interest. Just mound that up, be creative, try to use your imagination to see this not as a little lump of battered sphagnum moss, but as a landscape. Try to tuck the moss into the pot so that it's really settled in there. Work it with your fingers so that you create all sorts of interesting things going on in there. There we go. And then you'll want to get somebody to clean this terrible mess up and put your plant down. Use your mister or your hose on a fine setting and just mist this down. As a matter of fact, if you mist it hard enough, you can get it spinning. Now I'm just going to rinse my hands off so that I can hold it with one clean hand. And I'm going to rinse off the outside of this. So that it looks nice and clean. Now, newly repotted trees do not want to be put in the full sun. Try to keep them in partial shade. In other words, if they get a little sun in the morning, little sun in the late afternoon, like after 5 in the summer, they'll be just fine. As soon as you see the foliage growing out, or you turn it over and look at those roots and see the new little roots coming out, then you can go ahead and you can move it gradually into a little more sun. Now I'm going to show you a simple test so you can see if it's potted up tightly enough. You should be able to hold this, and you should be able to turn it out of the pot and have it stay together. And there it is, out of the pot, staying together. It's all set. And it should not come apart. Try doing that with soil. So here we have a new way to set up a traditional looking bonsai. We've made this beautiful little tree. The world is open to us. We have tropicals and temperates to choose from. We've taken something terribly difficult and made it exceedingly simple. These will work in the house. I'll show you how to grow them outside in a sunny window. We're all set. Thanks for being with me. Hi, I'm Brian Bachelder, and welcome to New Horizons in Bonsai, the show that shows you anyone can create bonsai, and good ones. Last week, we talked about the juniper, which is a traditional subject, but remember, we do not do the traditional method. This is a new method without soil. This time, we're going to be doing a syrinum cherry, which is a really nice subject. It makes flowers and fruit. It's available through many nurseries. We're going to be doing some root pruning. We're going to be talking about some diagrams, and we're going to be seeing some examples of reduction. Now here we have the syrinum cherry, and I'm going to turn this a little bit so you can see it from all sides. And here you can see the flaky bark, the gnarly roots, the reduced foliage, this twiggy pattern that's been set up through pruning and pinching. And now I'll set this aside and compare it to our nursery plants, which I have right here. We have these two nursery plants, nicely grown, very typical. They're kind of leggy, and this is a good opportunity to compare the pruned tree, which has been shaped deliberately, with the unpruned rooted cutting from the nursery, and you can see how long and lanky it is, and how the leaves tend to be splayed out in various directions as opposed to a nice tight group. So let's get these out of the soil, and let's get down to setting up our tree. Get the sphagnum moss first thing. Remember, we always start by soaking the sphagnum moss in the water. And here's our tub, and I've got this moss already soaking. And just to review, here is dry sphagnum as it comes out of the bag, whether you buy a hobby bag or a bale, and just put that right in the water. Careful not to breathe the dust. And then just reach right in and knead that up into the water so that it soaks up the water. This is a key element to the new method, the replacing of soil through the moss. And stir that up good, squeeze it a little bit to get it all thoroughly soaked, and then we have to choose a pot. Set that over there. Now the easiest way to choose a pot is to take your plants out of the soil so you can see what kind of root mass you're going to be dealing with. We'll get out our soil catching pan, knock these little critters out of the soil. These are really nice rooted cuttings which have probably been set up for about, maybe 6 months or so. Just take all that soil off of there. And we've got a nice little shape here. We've got some interesting roots emerging from under here. We'll be able to show some of these. They're nice and thick, nice and woody. This is going to be a nice one to set up. We have a group of 3 here, which we may or may not keep together, depending on how we do with the other package we have. Let's set this aside now. Take this one out. This one appears to be a single with some nice development down low. Take this out of this soil. This is when you find out the inside story about the nurseries you're dealing with. Look at this loam. This is excellent loam. Excellent, rich. It's firm. It's got clay. It's got peat. It's very nice. Very nice job. A beautiful job from this nursery. It's always nice to see that everybody takes the same care we do with the plants. So there's this one out of the soil. And now I'll set those aside and I'll get rid of the soil. And I will just move this over a little so that I can get to the sink. Now you probably are not going to want to do this at home. I'm going to rinse these off right into the sink, just to rinse off the last remaining bit of soil so that we can really see that development. There we go. Okay, now we've got our plants completely bare-rooted, and let's look at these roots. We've got an individual plant here which is just nestled in there, and then we have this really nice shape of these two together here. And we've got the roots spreading out. We'll have free rein here to get these roots to do pretty much whatever we like. That looks great. That's going to be very nice to work with. When you look at something like this, notice that it's rather one-sided. There's growth going in this direction and not in this direction. This tells me that this would really be the side to introduce the second plant. So let's take a look at this. It's the same story with this. The growth is going in one direction. So let's turn this around. And I think what we will do is we will just shorten some of these branches before we do anything else to make it easier to work with. I'm going to leave them a little long because I'm not thinking too much about shapes yet. I just want to take some of the weight off of this so it's not so ungainly to work with. That's good. And I think we can do the same to these. Let's just shorten them up a little so they're not so long and awkward. We'll trim this up a little better in a few minutes. There we go. Let's get rid of this. There. Now I think what we're going to want to do is set these plants together so that we have the three of them like this. Personally, I prefer odd numbers like 3 or 5 or 7. I personally would not put that fourth one in here. I would use this as a little separate something. Maybe we'll make a really small one out of that. So let's set him aside. Now let's look at those roots. We've got beautiful roots here, but they're rather long for what we want to do, and we want to hasten the reduction by pruning those roots. There is nothing to be frightened of with root pruning. You will see here that we have a long root that travels in a pretty straight line right down here, and lots of finer roots. Let's shorten that long root. Just shorten that right up. We've got a nice little stand here. It's almost like a little modern Swedish light stand right here, and these roots coming out can be shortened. So we'll just trim those a little bit. Do not worry about trimming the roots. The secret is to reduce the foliage afterwards. The foliage depends on the roots for water, for nutrients, and if you mess with the roots, you want to shorten the foliage. It's a simple thing. So now we will select our container. And as I've said before, it's hard to know what size container to pick until you get into the roots. I was going to use this, but we can use a much smaller one. Let's see what we have down here. Here's a smaller traditional bonsai pot, and these will easily fit into that, so let's go for that one. The first step is to hold these in one hand so that they're arranged the way we like. And let's work to get the sphagnum around those roots. As you look at the root bowl, you'll see that there are little pockets here and there. Just take some of the moss and stuff it into those little crevices. Attempt to fill in the little gaps in the roots so that all of the little gaps are filled in. Try to separate the roots so they don't overlay one another, but that they're cushioned with the moss, which has a very healthy medicinal effect on those roots. Now let's put just a little bit of this moss in here and settle this in and begin applying pressure to settle it into the pot. We're going to want to try to keep this a nice low horizontal planting, very similar to the other. Work with your fingertips, squash that moss in there. Don't worry about hurting the roots. It's more important to get those roots firmly in there than to leave them uninjured. If they're in there tight, they can repair and heal, but if they're loose, they'll never settle in. Just continue to work. Get that moss in there. Okay, and we're just about done with this step. Now let's get rid of this. Let's get out our moss. Decide on the attitude we want these in. By attitude, I don't mean whether they're happy or not, I just mean the leaning, whether they're straight or leaning. Squeeze the moss to get it nice and tight, and there's a simple test to see if they're tight enough. You should be able to turn them out of the pot and have them stay together. If they stay together, then you've done it just fine. If it falls apart, you need more kneading. So if they stay together, that's just great. Pop it back in the pot, and let's start mossing the surface. This is the most decorative part of the process, because this surface moss is what makes it look like it's been set up a long time. You can find moss a variety of places. This happened to come from a beautiful nursery that had some shady spots, especially where the water has collected and the nutrients. Anywhere shady that's moist. Now I haven't even settled the moss in. See how much nicer that looks with that in there. As I work the moss up to the roots, I'm going to try to let the majority of them show, because I don't want to hide that nice feature. That's going to lend a lot of age to this planting immediately. Now watch my fingers as I squash this moss. You'll see the water ooze right out. You see the water appear, and it squeezes through my fingers. It's that little bit of water squashing through the moss that cements the moss in place. You want to be sure to pull out any weeds that might be in there too, because there's no need to give them a head start. Especially in tropical areas, one of the biggest maintenance problems with any kind of potted plants, especially bonsai, is pulling out the unwanted weeds. When I lived in Brooklyn, artillery fern was a highly prized potted plant, and down here it's a pest, and I spend half my life pulling it out. I just keep squishing. Get this all nicely planted in here. And in a few short weeks, that's going to look like it's always been there. Now let's take another look at the shapes here. Let's decide which ones of these we want to develop. Sometimes you can get a very good effect immediately. Sometimes you have to think for the future. I think in this case we'll have a little of both. I think we're going to make some decisions about the shaping here, knowing that in a few weeks things are going to grow back and be more interesting. I'm going to cut right here. If you look right here at this knob, you will see that if I was to eliminate this top part, we would wind up with a branch that bends at a 90-degree angle right there. And that is a nice effect. Let me hold this other Syrinum cherry, and you will see, let's see, here's a nice place. You can see right here that that is a result of exactly that kind of pruning, where I have interrupted the flow of the branch by pruning something away, and the growth has come out in a different direction. That's what I mean by directional pruning. So let's clear that off, and in a few short weeks new growth will come jumping out of there, and I'm going to ensure that by shortening that stem. And we'll shorten this one. I think we'll shorten a few of these here, because right now we're more concerned with how it will look a little later. I think I will take this one right out of here. There we go. You can eliminate immediately any crossing branches, any of that. There we go. There. And now we have these 3 little Syrinum cherries all set up in what will be a very pretty display. Now's the time to decide on those nooks and valleys, the little crannies you want. Just squeeze your fingers into the planting, push the moss together to create little ridges of interest so that the surface isn't flat and dull. Create little peaks and valleys as you go. Flatten some areas, mound other areas up. This is not hurting the plant at all. Not at all. Bonsai are not tortured plants. They are among the most highly cared for, pampered plants in the world, and the proof of that is the luxurious growth of foliage and fruit and flowers that you get from a plant that's in an almost inexplicably small container. There we go. That looks a lot nicer. And again, if you want to test your planting, you should be able to turn it out and have it stay together. And as a matter of fact, if I wanted to plant this or grow this without a container, I could simply place this on my bonsai bench in the shade, and it would be fine. Now remember, always keep your newly transplanted bonsai in heavier shade than you would grow them. I would suggest very filtered sun. Very, very filtered sun. Water them well, and let's get out our mister and mist this down. I would suggest doing this in the morning and in the evening, and you want to keep that moss nice and moist so that it heals and grows right up. And this will be a beauty in no time. I would expect this to bloom and bear fruit probably in 3 or 4 years. There we go. Now I have another example of a Syrinum cherry. I'm going to set this aside. I think I'll just clear my deck here a moment and get out the big fella. Here we go. Get my Lazy Susan. There we go. Now, this Syrinum cherry looks very old. By traditional standards, I think it would be conservative to say that this tree would compare to a tree that might be 20 or possibly 30 years old. In fact, this tree has been trained for nearly 4 years. This tree was grown in the wild, in a field, and was repeatedly trimmed down. And the effect of that trimming is this heavy, heavy trunk and this good root development. Now, as you look at this, this is a good opportunity to discuss design for a moment. You see how the foliage is in very clear canopies, well separated from one another in groups, so that it makes an arrangement. You not only can see the foliage clearly, you can look in there and see those branches and those twigs, and that is essential for bonsai. Bonsai need to look like full-grown trees. And if you can't see the branches and you can't see the main trunks, you're not showing your tree off to its best advantage. If you take a look at the roots at the bottom, as I turn this around and you peek through the foliage, you can see the heavy growth of fat roots at the bottom and the way the moss is lumped and hilled. into an interesting variety of shapes. You can see that the moss has actually covered the container, just an ordinary clay saucer. And you can see how the bark has peeled and actually shows whorls of age and lines. This tree bears hundreds of cherries at a time, hundreds of flowers. It's a beautiful, beautiful tree. This could easily be grown in a south window. Up north, it could be grown in the greenhouse. It could even be grown in a large bay window or a big terrarium. This kind of a tree is well within the reach of anyone that simply wants to apply simple diligence and some effort. It's an easy subject to have success with. Syrenum cherries are available through many, many nurseries dealing in tropicals. So good luck with this. This is a fine subject. Now let's take a look at some other examples of reduction. One of the questions I hear most often is, how do I know if a bonsai is truly a bonsai? And there is one thing you can always check. Is the foliage reduced? And by reduced, I mean, is it simply smaller than it should be? Now here I have an Aralia. This is an Aralia that's commonly grown as a houseplant. And as you can see, it's a rangy, spindly thing with rather large compound leaves. And I have one of those leaves right here. This is a single compound leaf from this Aralia. This Aralia started out as a cutting about 2 years ago, and it was a cutting from this Aralia. And as you can see, the single compound leaf from the normal Aralia is larger than the dwarf Aralia that's an entire plant. This plant has been grown as a bonsai for about 3 years. And you can see how small the leaves are and how fine. I'll tip it, and if you can look in there, you'll see how fine the branches and the foliage are. As a matter of fact, this one is so small that to be certain it doesn't dry out, I did not even give it a drain hole. I just keep it in here. If it rains too much, a simple thing to do is to turn your pot over and put your tree right on it. And there's no way it can be overwatered. Then in periods of drier weather, you can simply pop it back into the pot. This is a great example of the kind of reduction that you can expect. I could carry this even further if I were to get the small enough shears I would need to get in there and continue trimming. The aspect of reduction that we apply to bonsai is no more than an ordinary principle you can see in any plant. As a matter of fact, I have these philodendron leaves. This is the leaf from a normal philodendron, a pothos, common house plant. And this is a leaf from the same plant. This leaf from the same plant as this one, the only difference being that the small leaf was in a pot and the large leaf developed after it grew far enough out of the pot to hook onto a tree and grow up the tree. So you see, plants all exhibit this basic reduction response. It's simply a response they produce to these various stimuli, whether it's to be contained or pruned. That's just a normal thing. There's absolutely nothing hocus pocus about bonsai. Nothing at all. They're the healthiest plants. They're the happiest plants. It's a simple thing. If you follow the method and don't impose any changes, you will have success. The only problem is do not make any changes. Just because I have changed from the traditional method, do not get the idea you can add things to the medium, you can do a different kind of medium. Do not add stones, do not add manure, do not add fertilizer. Simply follow the program. When you set up a bonsai, keep it in shade, keep it well watered, and it should be just fine. It should be just fine. Now, let's take one more look at these two Syrenum cherries, because they do represent two very different approaches to the same kind of plant. And I have some diagrams to help you out with that. Here we have a large single upright, and here we have a smaller double trunk. Now here's how we would do a diagram to help us visualize the single trunk. We have the large single trunk rising from away from the center of the pot so that the pot itself becomes the first horizontal, and then the succeeding canopies of foliage balance one another in this horizontal versus vertical. In the double trunk method, we have the two trunks that play off against one another. And as you can see, one of the trees is a little smaller than the other and leans out a little more so that there's a harmony and a balance. And while they're planted pretty much in the middle, these roots play against that to come out away from that. So remember, try to see your trees as diagrams. And if you want to spend a couple pleasant minutes, just look around your yard or around the woods or the parks. Try to sketch some of the trees as diagrams, not to do great drawings, but just to get your diagrams in your head, because you've got to have it in your head. You've got to see it in your mind's eye before you cut. Once you cut, it's gone. So, study your diagrams, follow the method, don't variate from it. Look for good specimens. Don't be satisfied with just foliage. Look for flowers and fruit. Look for interesting trunks. Next time, we're going to talk about the Bocarnia, the ponytail palm. We're going to discuss branch pruning and why we do it and what it does. And until then, please remember to look for the beauty, especially in small places. Until then, I'm Brian Bachelder, and this is New Horizons in Bonsai. Hi, I'm Brian Bachelder, and this is New Horizons in Bonsai, the show that teaches you how to create your own trees and emphasizes the fact that anyone can enjoy success with this new method on bonsai. Now, last week, we were talking about Bocarnia recurvata, the ponytail palm, and I've got one right over here I'm going to show you, and we're going to make one. And then we're going to discuss directional pruning. Let's step back here by the desk. And here is our Lazy Susan, which makes it a lot easier. And here is our Bocarnia. Now, as I turn this, you will see that it has a number of heads all along the neck here. And this is because I originally decapitated it. I severed the neck right off, and in a period of months, about 6 months, the new shoots came up from the side. And I'm going to pull this foliage back now so that you at home are able to see the various growths under here coming out all along here. And right now they're rather small little necks, but in another 2 or 3 years they're going to be long, very interesting crowns of foliage. This tree also blooms, incidentally. It's a beautiful thing. It's very easily grown. It's easily grown up north in offices or at home, any sunny window. They're very undemanding. They like to dry out. It's a great plant to use. So this is what we're aiming at. And now let's get our nursery container plant and take a look at it. Here's our nursery plant. It's another beautifully grown specimen, and as you can see, it's been topped. And you can see the new little heads of foliage beginning to emerge. Now, this kind of pruning makes a lot of people nervous, so I've prepared some of our simple diagrams so that you can get an idea of what happens. Now, what I've done here is shown the Bocarnia palm, which is not really a palm, by the way, and it's out of the soil, and you can see with the red line where we make our cuts for the roots and the cut along the neck. And what happens is underneath all of these leaves, it's just a typical plant. Each of these little red spots signifies a dormant bud, which has been living underneath the leaf. If you were to pull the leaves off, like I've done here. So when you decapitate the plant, these buds become very excited. They all rush out to take their new place as the new lead. And in this diagram, you can see the new little heads of foliage all emerging, which is what we have here. Now this process continues, and in time, one of them would achieve dominance and continue to grow above the others. But as we already know, if you continue pruning that, you will continue this process and the foliage reduces. Incidentally, you can see how much smaller all of this foliage is than in the original Bocarnia that I showed you a moment ago, and that's because this is newly emerged. The more pruning you do, the smaller they become. So let's put this aside and get out our moss and do the moss soaking that you've already seen a couple times. We have our tub, and here's moss that's been soaking. And to take you right from the start, here's dry sphagnum moss as it emerges from the bag, whether you have a hobby bag or a bale. And you just put that right in the water. And you just get it good and wet, push it down into the water, and begin to soak it. Now let me stress again that this is a method from start to finish, and you really should not stray from the method. Do not introduce anything into the sphagnum. Do not add things like stones or soil or manure. I've had people make those mistakes before, and they ultimately come to grief. Do not do anything but what I show you, and you should have success. Again, let's take some of the new sphagnum and squeeze it, and then when I put it back in the water, you see how it plumps right up. It plumps right up because it's absorbing all that water. This is the cornerstone of this method. The sphagnum keeps the water but still drains so the plants do not become waterlogged. Now the pot for this is more than likely going to be able to be nice and shallow, nice and contained. So let's choose a pot. I think what we'll use for this, I think we can use this little pot right for now. This is an interesting pot, traditional pot. We'll move our diagrams, move our sphagnum. Let's take the plant out of the soil. Do not be worried about this step. This is not a dangerous thing. A lot of people are very uncomfortable about this step, but it's really no big deal. Just work with your fingers to pull the soil away, and the soil should fall away pretty easily from a specimen like this. This is another nicely grown plant. And as we pull the soil away, you can see that there's quite a bit of this fat, meaty base that's been hidden. So this is going to emphasize the good aspects of this tree right away. Just work to pull those out. Be less afraid of damaging the roots than you are of leaving any soil. It's imperative that you get rid of all the soil. If you leave any, you're going to get into trouble later because the soil will promote wet and dry areas. It's going to promote fungus. It's just much better to get rid of all of it right in the beginning. This is not a mean thing. This is actually a kindness for this plant. It's going to have a very nice life after this. It's going to enjoy being fed and pampered and trimmed, taken care of. It's going to be brought in for parties. It's going to have people admiring it. It's going to have, as plants' lives go, it's going to have a good time. It's going to have a nice time. So we clear this away. Now, if you're working outside, this is an easy thing. If you're working in the house, of course, you have to be a little more careful. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to trim some of these roots. There's no need to get the dirt out of the bottom because we're going to be trimming that off. Let's just take our scissors, and we need it to fit into this pot. Now, the purpose of this large bulb here is to hold the water. And as it grows, the bulb gets larger. And you'll notice that if you let this dry out very much, the bulb actually shrinks. So we're not endangering it by trimming these roots. We're just going to trim these right away. Don't be frightened by it. Just go ahead and do it. Plants are very stoic little creatures. Their response to most anything is, okay, I can work with that. So, I'll get rid of that. And now, let's take our container here and invert this. Put a little moss in here. Remember, we always put a little pad in the pot first, just to get the drain holes covered. And again, this is a plus of this method. It doesn't come out the holes. You don't have to worry about it getting out when you water. I'm going to rinse this off. Do not do this at home. Your wives will never forgive you. There we go. It's all cleaned out. You can see that it's nice and clear. The roots come out in a very predictable pattern. It's a nice looking little plant. Now, step back over here. Now what we're going to do, as always, is we're going to attempt to fill these empty little cavities around the roots with the moss. And this is to keep the roots from touching one another as much as possible and making good contact with the moss. If some falls out, don't worry about it. Just keep putting that in there and then carry it over to the pot. Put that in the pot and begin to tuck the roots into the pot. Don't worry if they seem a little large. Just work to fill in those empty spaces with the moss. Work that moss all around. Don't worry if there are some roots exposed. You can either leave them if you think they add character, or you can trim them away. This is a nice little subject to start with. Just pack that moss in there. Work your way all around until you've got the whole thing loosely packed. And then what you want to do is begin to work with your fingers. Press your fingers into those little tight spaces and feel for any gaps so that you can add more moss if you need to. Start pressing and squeezing, and you'll notice that the volume of moss begins to rapidly diminish. Just work with your fingers to press that in there. And you'll notice as you work that quite a volume of water gets squeezed out. The moss holds an amazing volume of water. It's also extremely acidic, which is important for what we're doing because it encourages good, healthy response in the roots. They heal right up. They're very safe from fungus or other diseases. You can even tip this a little to get some of that water out. Now this one is just about ready for some cleaning up. I think some of these surface roots here are not so attractive, so we're going to trim them away. I like to see as much of this nice bulb as I can, so we don't want to hide it by piling the moss up too high. And as you work, turn your tree around so that you can see it from a variety of angles and make certain that it's going just the way you like. That's good. Now work your fingers into those edges to get it nice and packed. That looks fine. Now, let's get rid of the moss. Swap the deck a little here, break the sink a little. The important thing is to get the tree done. Now let's bring out our surface moss. We've got a nice flat of surface moss here collected from a nursery. And this is what really sets the tree off. Just begin placing these large pieces of moss along the surface to cover up the surface. And then we're going to press them into place. This is what really makes your tree look very finished in a hurry. And in a very short time, maybe 2 weeks, the moss is going to grow and fill in all those little spaces that are left. And it generally will stay nice and green and mossy forever. And now work with your fingers to squeeze that moss so that you feel the water coming through it. Just squeeze that in there. This is going to be a nice looking little tree when these little growths all get long and extended. It's going to look wonderful. You can get Bacharnias from most nurseries in the south and from most florists in the north, or any specialized plant place. They're a favorite with cactus people, succulent experts. They're very common as houseplants. They make a great tree. And just tuck the moss right up to under the bulb so that it seems like it's really sitting on the surface. You don't want it to look like you've just done it. Work that moss right up there so that it's settled right in. And we're just about done with this one. But remember to clean this off by misting it down. Get a nice spray of water going. Continue tucking that moss in. Now remember to keep a newly created bonsai in the partial shade. Keep it moist but not wet. If you're growing indoors, keep it in perhaps an east exposure, not a south. Move it gradually into a sunnier place, and it should do just fine. So here is our finished Bacharnia, which will be looking better and better as time goes on. Now, I said we'd talk about directional pruning, and this is very important with this method because, as you know, I am really try to discourage the use of wire. I get very upset when I see what would be very attractive little trees mummified with wire and twisted into nasty right angles. I don't think it does anything for them. Here is a bougainvillea, and we're going to do some pruning on it. It's a little hard to see the shape right now, but that's one of the reasons why we prune. We're going to eliminate growth that's growing into the center. We're going to eliminate growth that's crossing one another. We're going to eliminate everything that does not play up the design of the tree. So we'll get out our Lazy Susan again. These things are great because you can just keep turning them around. And I'm going to just eliminate all of the foliage that does not enhance the shape of the tree. Now, I'm pretty familiar with this one, so I'm pretty sure of what I'm doing. But as you do this at home, especially if you're doing it for the first time, study your tree, look at it from a variety of angles, and think about it before you cut. If it helps to draw a diagram, go ahead and do that. We'll be looking at some diagrams in a moment to help explain directional pruning and how it works. You can see I'm just trimming these off, being careful not to cut the leaves, but the stems. Get rid of these crisscross branches here. And you can see the shape opening up. There we go. I'll turn this around so you can see the inside of it. Eliminate these overly long pieces. And now you can see that the tree is starting to look more like a finished thing instead of a wild, rangy plant in a pot. It's a good idea to prune your bonsai so that you can see the interior, so you can see the major branches and the foliage from all sides. There. And here you have a better looking tree. You can see the branches, you can see these nice root development. You see how the moss mounds up, how we can build this up. And this is something you cannot do with soil, at least not right away. It would take years to achieve this. This tree has been set up for 2 years from a nursery specimen. Now let me set this aside and let's look at our diagrams for pruning. Here's a representation of a large tree or a large rangy plant. And these long red areas indicate where we've made our pruning cuts. The short red areas indicate the areas of dormant buds that will be coming out. So we would be cutting our roots to fit the pot shape, trimming back the foliage, and what we will get is a barrage of new buds all coming out. Now this diagram simulates in red the way a plant might normally grow, straight up with long, thin branches reaching up, but if we interfere, if we prune these things, we can get the growth to spread out. We can get the roots to spread out and develop a horizontal foliage instead of upright. Now here, what I've simulated is if you cut where the red mark is, you excite the little buds that are hidden all along under the bark, and they would be coming out in various angles, and by eliminating those that are in directions you do not want and shortening the others, you can develop this kind of canopy and a long branch in the direction you want. And this is how I do all my shaping. I never wire. I never wire. Now here we have a branch that simulates multiple cuts. It would have been cut here, which would have changed the direction, and it would have been cut here, and it would have continued this way. And we're going to find spots like this on some of these other trees so that you can get examples in your mind. I'll just put this guy here. Who made this mess? Now here is what's referred to as a snow queen hibiscus because of the variegated foliage. And you can see how the branches are all very horizontal, all nice and clean, little clear areas between the canopy. And this represents the normal growth pattern for this plant, but it's in a very miniature scale. The uninhibited snow queen would be a large, rangy plant. So this is one example, and you see the nice growth of moss. Now here, we have a firethorn, which is a popular subject with bonsai enthusiasts because it blooms, it makes beautiful little red berries. And you can see that this is in an informal leaning style with the foliage kind of wind-blown in one direction. And again, this is the result of only pruning, never wiring. Here is a ficus nidea, and we're going to be doing a whole segment on ficus, which is a wonderful family of remarkable trees grown indoors up north, and down here as ornamentals and hedges. You can see the remarkable trunk development on this and this spreading horizontal foliage, which is nothing but the result of careful pruning. This is also sporting the aerial roots that make the family so choice. And this is a good example of how the moss works for us, the sphagnum moss. You see this just comes right out. This is in no danger of coming apart. You could not do this with soil. And when it's time to repot this tree, we're just going to be sawing some off, putting some fresh sphagnum underneath, and we're rolling. Put this guy back. This is a little beauty. And you can see, incidentally, there's a variety of sizes of foliage. This is difficult to see because it's so small, but this is the size of the leaf if you keep at it. And if I had the time and the energy to do nothing but keep after this plant, they would all be that small. Now here is a common plant in South Florida and along the coastal areas. This is an Australian pine. It's not actually a pine, it's in the casuarina family. But it's a little beauty. It's been trained purely by pruning to get these open horizontal areas. And I'll turn this so you can get a better look at it. And a beautiful growth of moss all along the top. It's sitting on its little rock. This is a nice little planting. We're going to be doing some interesting things with rocks later on. And last, we have a very popular dentist office plant. This is the weeping fig, Ficus benjamina. And these are nothing but rooted cuttings that were planted closely together. And here you can see how the cuttings have actually grown together. They've bonded, and I refer to this as aggregate grafting, which is when you simply plant things in a group close enough that as they expand, the tissue just weaves itself together, and the entire thing carries on as one plant. And again, this is the result of pruning to achieve all these shapes. The key with tropicals is that they grow so rapidly, it's very easy to do shaping with pruning. So those are our examples for now. We've made the Bocarnia. We've trimmed this bougainvillea. And next time, I'm going to be showing you how to create a bougainvillea like this for yourself. This is a very easy plant to grow. It will do beautifully in a south window up north or in almost any exposure in the south or out in the west. It comes a variety of colors, and it's just it's a very easy plant that I know you'll have success with. So next time we'll get out our nursery plant and we'll do this. So for now, remember please to look for the beauty in small places. I'm Brian Bachelder. Thank you.